Hi everybody. Today I'll be rebuilding the rear suspension on my Alfa Romeo Spider, and it's toast on this car, and I learned that the hard way. A few months ago I took it to a Alfa Romeo meeting and we took a lap around the track, and this happened to me while I was not even trying to go fast.
Nice!
Now, luckily that happened to me on the track, so let's go fix it so I can take it on the road. First thing to do was to degrease everything just a little bit because it was so dirty I couldn't even see where the bolts are. Loosen the drain and fill screws, let the old oil out. They can be so seized, it's way easier to do it while the differential is still on the car. Put a few marks where the differential meets the drive shaft, because when you're putting it back together you want to put it exactly the way it was. Next, detach the drive shaft from the differential. These bolts were pretty tough to break loose, they're pretty rust welded. I had to use some penetrating fluid and a blowtorch, but eventually I was able to break them loose. As you go, you want to rotate the drive shaft to give yourself more room to access these bolts. Undo the nuts holding the link rods and move them out of the way. Take out the cotter pin and loosen the nut holding the differential to the reaction triangle, but don't take it out all the way out yet. Unscrew the two nuts holding the shock. Take out the brake lines and take off the caliper. I had to be very creative with the bolt holding the trailing arm since I'm doing this alone. So I put just a little bit of pressure with a jack so it relieves the tension off of this bolt holding the trailing arm. So I put a breaker bar, secured it with some zip ties so that I can hammer. So I have two hands to hammer on this one, and I had to torch it like 2 times, and I was finally able to break this one loose. There you go. Here I'm removing the bolt securing the trailing arm to the body, because I'll be restoring it and I'll also be replacing all the bushings in it. Onto the rebound strap, loosen the 2 upper bolts and unscrew the 2 bottom ones, and the strap should slide out. Mine needed a little bit of persuasion because I'm sure this is still the original one. At this point you should have jack stands or something else under it ready to catch the axle. Now take out the nut and the washer you previously loosened, and you're ready to slide out the axle. At this point, don't be like me and get yourself somebody to help you, because this is painful to watch. It needs to be pushed towards the passenger side of the car and then drop down. This goes especially for when reinstalling it into the car. These bushings you'll just have to break, but more about them in a minute. These brackets holding the sway bar are pretty straightforward, but to remove the sway bar from the car you pretty much have to drop the exhaust. It's possible to do it without it, but it'll actually be faster if you just drop the exhaust. These bushings are on crazy tight, and it took a lot of energy and wiggling to finally take them off. With the axle finally out of the car, it was time to give it a thorough cleaning. Same thing with the underbody to get rid of that Georgia dirt. I rented the axle puller and a slide hammer. You can rent them for free in most of the auto parts stores. It makes pulling the axle shafts out really easy. I took the dust cover off, and for the first time I was able to see the root of all my problems: bad wheel bearing. Using the Allen wrench, remove the 2 bayonet pins. Be careful with them, they're under a lot of pressure and they're very easy to break. Learned that the hard way as well. Here I'm removing the parking brake assembly to make room for the bearing separator, so that I'm finally able to press out the wheel bearing. Unless you have the special tool, pulling the wheel bearing is one of the hardest things you can do on a Spider. If you know somebody who has it or might have it, it's worth checking it out. Even if they're a couple of hours away, it's worth the drive. Because here I'm doing it the hard way. It took a lot. It took hours of grinding and hammering, and you have to be very careful not to damage the axle in the process. I tried cutting the retaining ring first and heating it up, and still you can see the whole bearing separator bending under pressure, and it would still not budge at all. You want to put the bearing separator as close as you can to the shaft, and finally, after a lot of patience, it broke loose. I cleaned everything, put the new parking brake shoes and all new hardware, and went to press on the new wheel bearing first. Don't forget to put the spacer first. Heat the new retaining ring really well. I left mine in the oven for quite some time. And quickly put it on. I also used the old one as a support. Press it on and let it cool down while it's still in the press. Also, be careful of the orientation of the retaining ring. You don't want to put it on the wrong way after all that trouble. I actually bought this press for this whole project alone, and I believe it already paid itself off. I went to install the new oil seal. There's a specialized tool for this as well, but I found the perfect use for that old retaining ring again, as it is the perfect size and it gives a nice support to hammer the new one in. With everything cleaned and restored, carefully put the axle shaft back in. Next I went to replace the differential pan gasket. This one's pretty straightforward. Just clean it up really well. Don't use anything hard, not to damage the aluminum. Use some sort of plastic scraper. I put a new gasket and use some gasket maker. After you put it on, tighten it down slightly till it oozes out, then let it dry and torque it down after an hour. Pressing out the trailing arm bushings was another challenge as well. I got really lucky with the first one. I was able to hammer it out, but the other one gave quite a fight. I ended up drilling the rubber part out and cutting them out. I eventually gave up on doing this and cut them out with a sawzall. Needless to say, be careful not to damage the trailing arm. Because of their shape, I couldn't find a way to put them in the press. It did work though to press the new ones in. If you're using the poly bushings, your job is somewhat easier, but at the time of recording, the company only had the front ones. Pressing out the link rod bushings is pretty straightforward, also for pressing them back in, and by now you probably have a good idea why getting a shop press for this whole job pays off. So I came to quite a problem trying to install the sway bar bushings. These are the original sway bar bushings, and problem number one, they are super tight. They are incredibly hard to install. I have no idea how they did it in the factory, but I was not able to put them on in any way. Like, you cannot put this in the press because of this bend here. It's impossible to put it in the press unless you have some special tool for it, and also trying to hammer it on, it just wouldn't budge, and I ended up actually destroying this bushing in frustration. You also cannot heat it up because you'll burn the rubber here. Problem number two, even if by some miracle you're able to put it on, you have to be dead on in the right position to install it in the car, because you don't have, like, this is all the wiggle room you have. Like, this will not move at all. So once you're pressing it on, you have to be dead on, get this angle right how it goes into the car. So I ended up getting these poly bushings. These are much more expensive, but it makes the whole installation a lot easier. Okay, go apart, and this one you can actually get started here, no problem. They are, I guess, a little bit bigger, just enough to press them on, and also once you press them on, you don't have to be exactly in a spot where you have to install it in the car, because it doesn't have that metal outer ring, and it's possible to adjust it once it's on the car. So if you're doing this, do yourself a favor, do not get these. I mean, they're good for the outer ones, you only have to put a screw through it, but for the inner ones, I wouldn't mess with these. I mean, these are $5 or like $5.99. These are $30, but they are worth it. As I said before, sway bar is easy to install, but get the exhaust out of the way if you can. Trailing arm to body, pretty easy, especially if you're using poly bushings. Just put a little bit of grease on them and lightly tap them in. I'm putting the new rebound strap and all the hardware in. Also, make sure you have all the parts in the right order and facing the right direction. I also cleaned up the wheel well really well and protected it. I did the same on the other side, and the axle was finally ready to go back into the car. Remember to align the marks on the drive shaft to reinstall it exactly the way it was. This would be an ideal time to change the shocks as well, but also they were not available at the time of recording. Next, install the link rods, and thanks to the poly bushings mentioned before, I was able to work my way around them. Again, I'm using the jack to support the trailing arm to install this bolt easily. And lastly, put the brake calipers on, bleed the brakes, put the new differential fluid in, connect the parking brake, adjust it, all that easy good stuff, and you're almost good to go. And finally, all the torque specifications according to Alfa Romeo technical manual. Trailing arm to body, 59 to 72 foot-pounds of torque. Trailing arm to the axle, 80 to 98 foot-pounds. Rear flange to the differential flange, 27 to 28 foot-pounds. Link rods to the rear axle, 23 to 25 foot-pounds. Axle pipes to the differential carrier, 19 foot-pounds. This nut reaction triangle to the rear axle, 73 to 91 foot-pounds. Brake calipers to shoe holders, 32 to 39 foot-pounds. Shoe holders to the axle pipe, 34 to 39 foot-pounds. And the pipe unions around 7 foot-pounds. And there it is, finally back on the ground. It drives a lot better, a lot smoother, but still there's a lot of work to be done. Hopefully I will do the front end soon. I hope you found some of the information here helpful. Until next time, thanks for watching. Sloppy out.